Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your professor today as I look at various card terms. Today I want to look at authentic cards, I want to look at reprints and retro cards, and I want to look at counterfeits and copies, basically fake cards that are printed out. And I want to start it off by just getting buybacks out of the way. So when we talk about cards, we talk about authentic cards, and then we talk about various different degrees of either authenticity, whether it's a cheap knockoff or whether it's a recreation from years later. But there are cases of buyback cards where a card will be produced, it will be opened up in a pack, somebody will have it, and then a card company will go along and buy the card back and then change it in some way. They'll put a foil stamp on it, or they'll put an autograph on it, and then they'll put it into new packs and re-release it. And those are original cards. So just getting that one out of the way. So an authentic card is basically a card that is produced during an initial print run or during subsequent print runs, but during the release window that the card company creates. And usually these cards come out exactly the same every single time. There'll be minor variations, like the color may fade a little bit based upon age, or you may have some printing quirks that may pop up here and there, but by and large the cards all seem exactly the same. There can be variations. It's possible that between one print run and a second print run there may be a change to the stock or the actual printing company. I don't know that there are cases where a company will shift from one printer to another in between, but I do know that in the case of 1958 Topps football, there are cards that are the same card. In this case it's Roger Brown, and the cards can come out in very, very different ways, where some of the cards look like they're later creations. I highly doubt that weathering caused the difference, so I assume there are two print runs, even though I don't know. But I can tell you that the glossier, newer version of the card is authentic because it has a gum stain on the front. So cards like that do appear to exist, where a card company will have two very distinct looking cards that'll pop out, but that's rare. And even at that, you can tell that the cards are basically the same. You're just not sure why one is in such good shape or the other one is in such bad shape. Now sometimes somebody will come along and they will make a copy of the card. They'll make a fake version of the card. And that's basically, you take a picture of it and you, whether it's in Photoshop or however, you then prep it to get printed out onto some new stock, and then you sell it as if it's the original card, or some cases people will actually call it a reprint even though it's not a reprint of the card. Reprint cards are created by official companies and they are officially created with checklists, etc. For fake cards and for copies, these are not actually cards. These are just homemade little projects that people are trying to sell, and they don't technically have any value. It's possible that some people will attach a value to it, but it doesn't have a professional value to it. And so these cards can vary in different qualities. So I know that there was somebody who recently sold a bunch of Tom Brady cards and then Peyton Manning cards that were basically photocopies on sheets of paper, and the quality of the prints was really pretty terrible. There are other cases where I bought some recreations of some old era cards, and they came out almost on a plastic like collector's edge like stock, and the quality was really good, and I didn't really mind ending up with that because of the fact that the quality was good. But the big thing was that there was no confusion about whether this was an original card or not. The cheap knockoff that I bought was on a highly different card stock than the original, so I was okay with that. But that leads me to counterfeits. So a fake or a copy is basically somebody making something that they want to just pass off, but if you hold it in your hand, odds are you're not going to be confused. A counterfeit is very different, where it is an attempt to actually create a perfect replica of the original to where you hold it in your hand and you can't tell. Just like with currency, when people try to pass off a fake $20 bill, they try to make it with a paper stock so that when you hold it, you don't know. You think it's original. And that's what counterfeits try to do. They try to be made in such a way so that they can enter into the market and be a part of the market. This was a big problem with 1980s cards specifically, because the card stock during that time was pretty subpar. So it wasn't that hard to recreate a card that was close enough. And the reason that Upper Deck has its holographic logo, and then also that Pinnacle has its little barcode at the bottom, is to make it very, very difficult for people making counterfeits to be able to replicate that. Making the barcodes tough enough, but a hologram, you got to be pretty hardcore to do that. So 1989 and then subsequently 1991, these were efforts during this time to basically say to collectors, look, you can guarantee that these cards are original. So counterfeiting isn't something you're going to run into too often now, because with the upgrades in quality of production of cards, that kind of waned. Plus, as the junk wax era was kind of easing back, and the complexity of how cards were being, really high-end complex cards were being crafted, it cut back on the ability for people to make affordable counterfeit creations. So they're very rare now, and that's a good case for grading cards. And then there are also minor manufacturers, people trying to get into the industry or just kind of creating some cards that they want to sell. And you'll see some recreations of cards that'll pop up there, but for the most part, that's pretty minor. So the main thing that we're going to be focusing on is retro cards and reprints. Reprints, like I said, are made by an original manufacturer or one of the accepted manufacturers. In the case of, say, Star, where Star wasn't a major manufacturer, and I don't think they even really existed by the mid-90s. So when Topps wanted to make retro cards, which Fleer had been doing because Fleer had made cards from 86, 87 on in basketball, but if Topps didn't have the ability to do that, and they certainly weren't going to be creating rookie cards of Fleer because that's a competing brand, so they went out and they chose to make reprints of Star cards, which was a property they could get away with doing that. And that is an official reprint of a card because Topps is a recognized company. It had a whole checklist of cards, and so that holds up. But usually when you encounter reprints, it's going to be like the Topps Stars cards, where their reprints are close enough, they look exactly like the original cards, but if you hold the two cards up, they look wildly different. Maybe there's more of an indenting, the glossy surface, the card thickness, all of that stuff looks a little bit different. And then on the back, you're always going to see a modern copyright date. So those are dead giveaways, but with reprints of cards, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be confused between the original card and the new one. Now sometimes that line will cross as you get into reprints of recent cards, because then the card stocks are very similar. But you're not going to encounter that very often. Now reprints can come in different ways. So in the case of Score, for their 10th year anniversary in football, they decided to make a 10-year anniversary line of cards where they wanted to show the original cards, usually rookie cards, of players who were still playing. So Chris Carter, Barry Sanders, Troy Aikman. And these cards are very similar to the original cards, almost identical. The big difference is basically the glossy surface of the cards and the copyright date, but you're not really going to run into the copyright date. So these are cards where the card stock was very similar because the industry had already, by 1989, gotten pretty modern. But the gold foil stamp on the front and the serial number on the back are the two main giveaways that this isn't an original card. Again, there's no confusion, but this is a true reprint card. Everything about this card is the same. They didn't put a special new number on it. They have the original number that Chris Carter's card in 1989 had. So this is an opportunity in 1999 to open up a card and get a 1989 card out of it, even though it's not an original, it's not a buyback. It's a 1989 themed card. And then the next year they did the exact same thing, and this card was a lot easier to tell, and it's also not a true reprint. This is a partial reprint. So in 2000 they made a darker card, and they still have foil on the front. But the big giveaway on this card is the back looks absolutely nothing at all like the original card. It has a whole nother theme to it, and so it is a reprint on the front, and it is a regular card on the back. It still counts as a reprint, but it's where you're transitioning away from a true reprint, which is the card looks identical with only minor modifications. Now in 2012, Score kind of stepped it up a step further, and they basically moved away from reprints into retro cards. This is again borderline because the whole design of the card is the same. And even the number is the same for these reprint cards, but they don't fully fit as a reprint because the image on the front is different, even though everything else about the front is the same for each of these cards. But the back also is wildly different. Again, it uses the same card number as the original card, but that's not enough. A reprint is saying this is what the card looked like. And when you look at the back of these cards, this is not what the cards looked like. So while in 2000 you can get away with saying that it's a reprint because the whole front is the same, in this case, even the picture on the front is different, so this really does count as a retro card. But this is, again, a transitional case. And you can look at Marvin Harrison to really see the difference. You can see Marvin Harrison's original 96 rookie card, you can see his 2000 reprint card, and you can see his 2012 retro card. Now in 1994, Topps released their Topps Archive set for football. And in this set, they took their original 1956 and 1957 card designs and they actually reprinted the entire set of each of these 2 years. Now for its 1956 cards, it's a lot easier to see the difference. In both cases, it's high gloss cards in a thin card stock, so there's no confusion. In the 56 case, though, the original cards were larger. That's just the size that Topps cards were made in 56, and 57 was the first year they used their standard card stock. So the cards do shrink down a little bit, but everything else, including pretty much the entire proportions, line up. But this card set also has a gold version of it. So Topps Archives has its straightforward and it has its gold foil version. And both of these technically count as reprints. They also followed up starting in 1996 by making reprints of players, their Heroes insert set. And this is a case where they made reprints of every single card of a player's career, all of their Topps cards. So if they happen to have any Fleer cards, tough luck, doesn't matter to them. And in this case, anytime that there was a tall boy, they shrunk the tall boy down to the normal proportions of a card. So it's not a true reprint in certain cases. And in the case of Joe Namath, they actually did do a special release of his tall boy proportion card. But these are straightforward reprints, but they also have chrome versions of them and refractors along with that. And the cards do have a logo on the front, which is flagging that they are reprints. But again, on the back, you can see, in this case, you can see both the original copyright date and you can see the new copyright date. But the new copyright date will always be on these cards. So if you're ever confused, check the copyright date and that will certainly clear it up. But for these pre-1990 cards, there's going to be no confusion as to whether it's an original or a reprint because nobody went back and used the original card stock for any of these reprint cards. And again, that makes it a little bit muddier when you get into modern cards that are reprinted, and especially when it gets to Topps Chrome cards. So whenever Topps makes a reprint of a card, it's using the original release card. It's not using the Chrome version if there happened to be one. So in the case of Brandon Marshall, when they made their 2010 reprint of his card, they were using the original 2006 card, and they made a chrome version of that card. And the way you can tell the difference between the 2010 reprint and the 2006 chrome original release, yes, the border's white on one and it's mirrored on the other, but the big thing is all Topps Chrome cards have Topps Chrome on them, unless they're a reprint. And when they're a reprint, then they do not have the Topps Chrome on there, because that wasn't on the original card that Topps Chrome reprint is reprinting. So all the Topps cards have just Topps, and when they reprint them in Chrome, they keep just the Topps. So that's the big way that you can tell between an original Topps Chrome rookie card and a reprint of the original Topps card. So now, headlonging into retro cards, I want to start off by talking about Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia was a card company that made cards for a couple of years in the 60s. More correctly, it was a gum company that made cards for a couple of years in the 1960s. And then in the 1990s, Pacific brought the name back, but nothing else, and they made 1 year of a set that really wasn't retro in any way. And then in 2009, Upper Deck made a retro set that was a Philadelphia-based set, and you can see that the cards are almost identical on the front. This is basically the one case where they actually went back and made cards with pretty much the same card stock. It's an unusual move that they made for this particular set, and they do have retired players in here, but the retired players cards look nothing like from the original time, so it's easy to tell, especially on the back. And the key on the back is that basically the cards have stats and they go through that normal stuff. In the 2009 version of the cards, they go through more of an exploration of the player. There's more indenting, there are lots of things that you can tell. But fortunately, these cards don't feel the same way in 2009 as they did in the 1960s. So there shouldn't be any confusion. Topps also like to play around with their different styles because they've had pretty much the entire run of football cards to play around with. And starting in the mid-2000s and really in the early 20-teens, they like to play around with the old styles with retro cards for especially their rookies. And here we have a case where we have the John Elway rookie card, we have his 2010 reprint, his 2010 reprint chrome card, and then we also have a 2012 rookie card of Brock Osweiler. And the Brock Osweiler card looks exactly the same as John Elway's rookie card. The backs look the same. There's no confusion as to whether the Brock Osweiler card is a 1984 card because he wasn't even alive at the time. So they don't have to worry about that aspect, but it's fun to look at the old style cards and see what new players would have looked like at the time. And in this case, in 2012, we really get to explore a lot because here's the tall boy. Now the tall boy is a normal width card that's really tall, and usually when they were doing reprints of those, they would just squash the card so it'd be normal size. But in this case, they actually kept the proportions right, used the normal height, and then just narrowed the card down so they become essentially mini cards. They're not mini cards, they're different proportions, but they're kind of like mini cards. And they have a regular card and they have a chrome card, and they also use the 1957 Topps card style as well in this year. And with their Topps chrome card that looks pretty much the same, and with the regular card they were playing different tricks with colors and the like. And then you can also do a retro card like Upper Deck's Retro Set, where they didn't even bother to remake old style cards. They went with a whole new design that totally looks old. And that's the most fun version of retro cards, simply because you get to play around with new ideas, new concepts. And oftentimes you will see cards that are remakes of old cards but with new players or new approaches. But oftentimes you'll also see cards that are truly retro. And the term retro refers more to what they did here in Upper Deck. So that's basically it. That's authentic cards, that's knockoffs, that's counterfeits, that's retro cards, that's reprints. That's essentially what you need to know. Those are the big ones. There are some subtle elements that go into it. I've already addressed some of them. There are a few others that pop up. And if there are any questions that you have, by all means, ask in the comments below. If there are things that you're not entirely sure that I got right, again, there are always things I'd like to learn, especially with the 1968 Topps cards, as you can tell. So let me know, start any discussions that you want. I hope that you like this video. I hope that it helped you out quite a bit. I hope that you'll hit the like button. Feel free to subscribe and check out the other videos that I have. And thank you very much for watching.